Thank you for having
Okay, so welcome to another episode on Dopamine Dialogues, the first video podcast. And yeah, it had to be video because we are across the world on two different continents. Um, I am honored to be joined by Alasaly today. Um, a woman whose work, in my humble opinion, is a living dedication and prayer for dignity and healing and global impact. And before I introduce you, Shahid, I'm just going to do a brief introduction before we begin. But I just want to acknowledge the synchronicity of this because when I started Dopamine Dialogues, which was a few months ago, a couple of months ago, my intent with the podcast was to hold meaningful, healing, deep, inspiring conversation. And it started so small, I had no idea that the seed and the voices would carry across the ocean to Florida, and how your team found the podcast and felt that it would resonate with the work that you do. So I find that to be such a beautiful synchronicity. First of all, I just had to say that.
Yeah,
So,
thanks you for that. I completely when I think Katie had reached out to you and she was telling me about the podcast, and I was like, what an awesome opportunity, and how incredible is it that we get to meet people across the world and have these conversations. I think that's my favorite part of all of this.
I know it's amazing. It's amazing. So Shahid holds a master's in international psychology. That's right. And he's currently a graduate. Are you still a graduate at the University of Florida, a PhD graduate?
I am. I should be finishing up the semester, so fingers crossed.
Awesome. But you have a rich background, and when I did research, looking you up, the same phrase keeps coming up, and that is humanitarian entrepreneur, which I find so powerful because usually, when you think of entrepreneur, um, it's individual focused, and humanitarian entrepreneur just sums up your work so beautifully. But you're also the founder and creative director of Blue Meets Blue, and that's what really, drew me in when your team reached out. And Blue Meets Blue, for the listeners, and Shahid will tell us more about it, but it's a high-end, slow fashion humanitarian label based in Chicago, which you founded in 2015. So that's 10 years ago already. And this brand employs refugee women, many of whom were seamstresses or artisans in this trade back in their home countries. And your mission was to foster empowerment and healing through through community, creative therapy, and collective therapy, which is something that you specialize in.
Mhm.
So I hope I summed that up correctly.
Amazing. That was incredible. I appreciate that.
So, Shahid, let's go back to the beginning. I'm really interested in your upbringing. You grew up in Chicago in the US, right?
I actually grew up in Arizona. I grew up in Arizona and I spent every summer in Syria. So my parents are Syrian immigrants. And Syria for me was where we'd spend every summer, where we would go and stay with grandparents, family, belonging, culture, history, language, food, cousins and sleepovers. It was, my home outside of Arizona. And so um, I say this because it shaped a lot of my upbringing, and it shaped a lot of why Blue Meets Blue started. So in 2011, Syria went through its civil war during the Arab Spring, and the people of Syria were protesting, wanting democracy in their country. And at the time, they were ruled by the Assad regime, and very quickly, there were a lot of crackdowns and a lot of refugees as a result of the protests. And so, as that was happening, obviously, we were no longer able to go to Syria during the summer. At that time, I was in Chicago. I had spent about 12 years in Chicago before I moved to Florida. But I was no longer able to go back home and I was no longer able to see family. And, for a good decade, people get older, you lose grandparents, you lose family members. And I think that's one of the most difficult parts because I was able to go back this summer and, it's just not the same anymore, right? You go to a grandparent's house and you expect to see, or, you're expecting that same welcome and the same, but, they're no longer there. And I think that's very difficult. So that was something that was absolutely stolen from the people that were no longer able to visit. But I say this because at the time, during 2013, I was doing my master's in international psychology, and there were a lot of refugees that were coming to America and all around the world. But I was in Chicago at the time, and I was pulled to do something because, again, for me, Syria was not a place on the map, it was home.
Mm.
And so I wanted to do something that was art therapy, but without calling it therapy. And that's where Blue Meets Blue originated. So I quickly realized that when trauma happens, especially within community, it's not just personal, it's very social and it reshapes identities, right? And it reshapes communities and how we show up for one another. And that is what drew me into both fields, psychology and then later sociology. So with psychology, I was looking at it from an individual level, and then sociology later, a more communal level.
Yeah.
Fashion was I love fashion, and it came into my life because I wanted to use it and show how resilient the Syrian people were. And like I said, I wanted it to be art therapy without calling it art therapy. So when we would get together with the refugee women, we would sit down together collectively, and they would. First of all, I learned so much from them. My background is not in, sewing or design or any of that. It was more of a personal inquiry and hobby, and I was really excited about it. But what I quickly realized was, first of all, I really wanted these women to already have had a background and a
Yeah.
skill set in sewing because that mattered so much to me. A lot of people, they come from, whatever country, their human capital doesn't translate, right? Their skill set doesn't translate. And they call that the taxi driver phenomenon, which is, they come from a rich background. Maybe they owned a restaurant or they owned a factory or they were a medical doctor in their country. And then they come and the only job they're able to get is, potentially to be an Uber driver, a taxi driver. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but their skill set is not being acknowledged, and it's very invalidating, and it adds to a lot of the depression that they're already feeling. So I really wanted these women to feel like their skill set was being celebrated, and that they were being celebrated, and they were seen, and their work mattered, and that made such a huge difference for them because I was the one asking them for their advice and for their opinion, and I was asking them to teach me, and they felt so empowered when they knew that we actually relied on them and they had to show up for work and we needed, their help doing, each person had a very specific job. One person was in embroidery, one person did the beading. But while they were doing this, they were having really open conversations because they all also had a very similar background. They had a similar experience, and trust was very easily established. We all spoke Arabic together. So they had the language, they had the friendship, they had the similar experience and the skill set. And it was just very natural. It was like a healing circle without being a healing circle. Yeah, so that's a little bit about that.
Where does the name Blue Meets Blue come from?
So the way I had envisioned it, unfortunately, a lot of refugees, when they leave their country, they take a really difficult journey. And while not all refugees take the same journey, a lot of them do have the experience of being on a boat, and the only thing they see is the blue of the ocean meeting the blue of the sky. And for me, that symbolized, hopefully, a journey to freedom, a journey to, bridging two different countries and two different backgrounds and two different histories. So Yeah.
It's beautiful. I've got my blue jewelry on today to honor.
Oh, I love that. My shirt's blue. I don't know if you can see it. Lighting's not great.
Oh, it's blue. So, what was the moment where you realized that fashion could be a vessel for dignity and healing? And why fashion specifically? Because you said yourself that you don't have a background. It was more of a personal inquiry. Why did that become the vessel?
I was always interested. I didn't have like a professional background in design. I had taken a lot of classes and I was really interested in it. And I've always been into art. My father, his hobby is oil painting. Like I think genetically we have this kind of artistic, creative background, and I really like fashion. And I felt like that to me when I did international psychology. I really was interested in art therapy, whether it was going to be through painting and creative arts or it was going to be through something else. Um, and at that time, I was also really interested in the idea of slow fashion. Um, because in a world of fast fashion, think of all of the big fast fashion stores, you feel like, or I felt like, environmentally, it was awful for the environment, the footprint that it was leaving. The I really wanted it to mean something to the people that were making it and mean something to the people that were going to buy it. And so it just kind of happened, I guess. But I think I mean, I was always inspired also by people that were doing things where refugees would come and they would, do things in their own skill set, right? So there was a friend of mine that had started a company where they were doing crochet items and other handmade, I forgot what bags, like accessories, tote bags. And at the time, I felt like I really wanted something that hit slow fashion and it gave these women a job in their skill set. And there were a lot of things that I wanted to wear that I couldn't find. Like I really wanted an A-line skirt with pockets in it, and I just couldn't find what I was looking for. So it just kind of checked off all the boxes for me. But I think it began again when these refugees were coming to America or around the world and arriving from Syria. At the time, it was the largest refugees coming from any country was from Syria. And so when we had started watching them sew together and watching them stitch and bead and embroider, it was more than work. It truly became a kind of a therapy, a storytelling. I do a lot of storytelling and narrative work. And just seeing that kind of resilience and survival through the arts, it was more than just sustainability for me. It felt like it in not just the environmental sense, obviously, it was about slowing down. It was about honoring people's lives and their journeys and what they had been through. And then work is dignity. And so on every level, it just made sense.
The first time I heard of this concept of slow fashion was when we met on our first Zoom call. And I found it so intriguing because I then realized, the fast fashion, and I love this whole, I've been exploring the masculine, feminine ways of showing up. And fast fashion for me is very much about the hustle and the chase and um, a lot of fire action, where slow for me vibrationally feels more like flow and more authentic. Would you say that's how you see it vibrationally?
I love that you said that. That's such an interesting way to think about it. And it's not something that I had necessarily thought of. But if we're going to think of it from that perspective, from a capitalistic perspective, from whatever perspective, absolutely. I would say if you're going to, from an energy perspective, slow fashion um, would definitely be, it's a resistance, I guess, right? Of that consumption, of that capitalism, of that quick haste, if you will. And then most importantly, it's also a resistance against how disposable everything has become, right? In this world that we live in, where we just wear something once, twice, and then we throw it out because it's so cheap and we can buy five, right? This is an honoring of time. It is an honoring of that energy. It is an honoring of that presence. And it takes time to make these things by hand. It takes time to embroider. It takes time to make something beautiful, right? And so I think the time that a garment should live in someone's closet, I think should be timeless. And that's why the idea of buying sustainably is more than just buying beautiful clothes. It's like it's a whole journey, right? And that's why I always say it means something to the people who made it, but it really means something to the people who buy it, because you're thinking intention, you're thinking respect, you're thinking so many things. I had a lady in Chicago, and she was so kind. She trusted us to make her wedding. She didn't want a dress. She wanted a top and a skirt, because and this is how much she had believed in the mission. She's like, in addition to it being sustainable, I don't want to just wear it once. I want it to be a skirt and I want it to be a dress. Obviously, it was still it looked like a something you'd wear to a wedding. But I loved that she wanted to wear it again. I loved that she was like, I don't want to just wear this on my wedding day. I want to be able to wear this skirt multiple times. I want to be able to wear the shirt multiple times. And I think, for me, that really signifies, and it just goes along with everything that we did stand for. So yeah, I like that you're looking at it from this energetic perspective.
And how did you find these women?
The women that were working with Blue Meets Blue. So at the time, I was volunteering with a resettlement agency over there. We were doing a lot of interpretation and translating work, and so naturally, a lot of the women that were coming to Chicago were coming through these centers, and I was connected with a few centers, and I would just have these conversations with the women, and a lot of women were asking, "Do you know anybody that needs work? Do you know anybody that has, positions available?" And so we just through conversation figured out who had a background in sewing, and we just immediately started working.
It's amazing. And how did you find, I'm curious as to how you found the space and then got it going. Was it sponsored?
Yeah, so to start, we started actually in one of the homes, because we wanted them to feel like it was a very intimate gathering. We wanted them to feel like it was very intentional and slow, and a safe space where they could talk and have these conversations. And then slowly we moved to a more industrial location. But a lot of it came from kind of sponsorships. A lot of it came from people's donations that were really interested in the work. Some of it came from the resettlement centers that wanted to see these women work. So it was a little bit of everything.
Okay. And when I mean, depending on how much time you spent there, but how did you see the shift or the transformation and the recovery in these women through the storytelling, through the stitching of the garments?
I definitely, through the whole work, there was this collective healing that you could sense. So through the stories, right? At the beginning, the stories were a lot more focused on the immediate aftermath of trying to figure out, the rush of being in a new country and figuring out school for the kids, and figure everything out in this new environment, right? And it was more about survival. Whereas as time progressed, and naturally they were settling in more. Naturally, they got to know each other more. They got to know me more. There was this routine, if you will, with the schedule of when we would show up and when we would do the work, and how it looked. The conversations shifted, and there were a lot more stories that were so for example, one of the women, she had come, and she was telling me how she was so happy that she now was able to send cupcakes for her son's birthday at school. And to me, it was these like little stories that, for us, this is kind of like an everyday, right? And to hear it, it's like you're seeing things with a fresh perspective and fresh eyes. you're like, wow, like the things that I take for granted, right? The way that I live my life, where this is not something that I have to think about. These are the kinds of success stories for me that made me so happy that this is what I was doing. Because as a mom, I know how important that is, right? For her, for these women to be like, I was able to get my kids new clothes or new supplies, right? Because now I'm working and I don't have to get hand-me-downs or I don't have to wait for donations. That for them is success, right? That for them is survival. That for them is what they're working for. And a lot of refugees that I had interviewed, when you ask them about what it is that they hope for the future, or what it is that, and it's always about the kids. It's always, I left my home country not willingly, I was forced out. And the one thing that I hope for the future, not me, but my kids, I want my kids to have a better life than me. So for them to feel like they were able to have given their child an experience of bringing cupcakes and celebrating their birthday in class, so that the child doesn't feel left out, or so that the child doesn't feel less than, right? It's these little things that for me signify success, right? It's not about scalability. It's not about consumption. It's not about capitalism. It's about these little human stories that show, this is what makes it worth it.
I love that. That is so humbling. And you're right, we take those little things for granted. And yet
Mhm.
that is so significant, to someone that couldn't have done that before. That's amazing.
Mhm.
So you mentioned that Blue Meets Blue at some point came to an end, and you're reviving it right now. Tell us
Correct. Yeah.
about that.
So 2019, I was moving from Chicago to Florida, and so unfortunately, it was this time where I was trying to figure out if I could keep it going, if I, could open up another, location. And a few months later, COVID hit. And it just seemed like, not the time to obviously get people together. I didn't want anybody to potentially get sick. And then I had a child. So it just was a time where it just seemed like a good time to stop the work. And I had just put it on the back burner, and I was moving on. I had started the PhD in sociology, and I was busy with other things. And then this year, the regime fell, and Syria became free. And it was just such a full circle moment, because I got so inspired to start it back up again. And I was really excited about it because I was able to go back to Syria this summer and source fabric from there. So now it's this full circle moment where the fabric's coming from Syria, and then the artisans here are working on making the collection. And again, it's very slow fashion. So the items are made to order. We don't make inventory because we don't want waste. So it's a really exciting time, because the fabric that we're sourcing from there is in an effort to keep the textile industry alive over there, because 80% of the factories were intentionally destroyed during the Civil War. And so there's only one more person over there that makes brocade by hand. Other ones are just made via machine. And brocade is one of the Syrian fabrics that it's so beautiful. It's silk. And so I sourced the fabric from there. We're getting it to be produced over here into the new collection. And it just felt like the perfect time to restart it. So we're relaunching in January.
I just love how your impact has rippled across the ocean back to Syria and came full circle. I had goosebumps when you said that. And Syria is on the Silk Road, right?
Correct.
So I mean that is restoring of heritage. That is, ancestral lineage that you are reviving and rebirthing. That is so powerful, Shahd. It's just amazing. Um, Culturally, and you're speaking a lot about, the Syrian refugees, but when your work is very much focused on collective trauma and collective recovery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, have you found that there are different nuances or different ways in which different cultures recover.
Absolutely. And I think that that's such a great question. A lot of the work that I do sociologically is this inquiry into how people heal collectively. And I do believe that healing happens in community. I feel like a lot of times we push people into a certain timeline or a certain type of therapy or a certain type of healing. And I'm really interested in this understanding of how people heal around the world. And unfortunately, when you have these refugees coming to America or to the West, there's always this imposition of a very Western framework. And I think that that is very damaging to people that come from collectivist communities. The West is very individualistic in the way that we approach therapy, in the way that we approach healing, in the way that we approach the question of what trauma even is. Whereas people coming from Eastern cultures or from collectivist cultures, they approach it very differently. And I think it's very important. So, for example, for resettlement centers or for people that are going to be working with people coming from different parts of the world, to be able to understand and be culturally sensitive and aware of where these people are coming from, how they approach healing, how they approach therapy, um, and for us to apply this Western therapy system as the gold standard by which all else deviates is very damaging to people that need something else, right? So I think this is such an important opportunity for people to learn because there are so many indigenous healing methods that have worked for people for centuries, and they have used them and continue to use them to be able to adapt and to survive and to be able to be resilient from whatever trauma they had experienced. But the main thing for these collectivist societies, and I believe for humans in general, is that healing does happen in community. And so to be held by others, to be validated by others, for others to bear witness to your trauma and to the pain that you have been through, and not dismiss it and not invalidate it and not give you a timeline for healing or give you the best, therapy for healing or whatever. I think that is so important. And I think it's something that we often overlook in the West.
100%. And I love that you say that. I've just myself, I've
Mm.
tried Western therapy, and I love how you describe that because it is very individualistic,
Mm.
and you feel like the spotlight is on you, and you don't really feel like your therapist necessarily is bearing witness.
Yeah.
It feels like a job. And
Yes.
I initiated a women's circle for myself, which is why
Mm.
I love this work that you're doing, just to go back to our roots. Because if you think of, before patriarchy, before capitalism, before colonialism, even, that's how we used to naturally come together and share and trade. And healing was something that I think for women especially, being a healer, being an alchemist was frowned upon because it didn't fit the traditional template of what a healer should look like.
Mm.
And you can take it back to the witch trials, even, so it really, um, this work really feels like revisiting a part of our ancestry that has been forgotten, but that is so rich in knowledge.
Mm.
How does this work influence your own family and your own healing? You have three children. Um, are they aware of what you do, and how does your work, how do you see that showing up in how they show up?
Yeah. So my children see my work and they see that it's not about the income or the social media or any of that stuff. They see, I genuinely want them to be able to see that they can choose whatever sector they are a part of, whatever industry they choose to be a part of, whatever job they have. I try to always tell them that you can add a humanitarian aspect and inject it into your work. I wrote a kid's book about humanitarianism, which is this book for children that gives them very active language in what it means to be a humanitarian, because it's never too early to have that conversation with your kids. And and in that book, what I like to tell children and what I tell my kids all the time is that you do not have to wait to be an adult to be a humanitarian. You do not have to be a part of a large NGO to be a humanitarian. You don't have to, you can, you can start right now. And something as simple as smiling at somebody is, very kind, right? I think children are a lot more, they just get it a lot more than adults do, right? It's very natural and innate for children when, especially younger children, when they see a child crying or they see a child getting bullied, they instinctively will go, hug the child or be there for the child or, share their lollipop, whatever. And I think the older people get, we inject politics and news and racism and all of these awful layers into our interaction with other people. And so I give examples in the book of what, ways that you can be a humanitarian. And this is something that I've done with my kids, which is we'll make these blessing bags, which is like a big Ziploc bag, and we'll put toiletries and like socks and toothpaste and toothbrush and a little bit of cash and a kindness note. And when you're at a stoplight and you see a houseless person, you can just give them a blessing bag, right? And that goes such a long way, because I try to have these conversations with them of what is something that you feel like they would really need, right? Somebody who doesn't have a home, somebody who does not, have these like very basic toiletries that we take for granted. And I tell my children this, right? We're very unaware of how blessed we are. So let's think of the things that make us feel comfortable and how can we try to make somebody else comfortable. So it's these little things that I think parents, it doesn't take up much time and it leaves an impact on your children. So with Blue Meets Blue, I used to have them help me if I'd have an event or I had a pop-up shop or whatever. My kids are they're used to helping me with setting up and taking down and really seeing if we're gonna go and drop supplies off, or some days I'll have to bring them with me, really seeing what that looks like. And I hope that that leaves an imprint, and I know that it does. um, but for them to know that they can also be a part of that healing journey, right? For them to see that you can be a part of it no matter where life takes you, no matter what kind of job you choose. And I remind myself that all the time too, right? It's this journey that we're collectively taking as humans of repair, of resistance, of healing, and it's not like separate pieces, right? It's kind of it's all one circle, one story.
It's kind of interwoven like your garments are. And I love the symbolism of that. Your PhD topic, what
Mm.
did you choose to explore?
Trauma. I chose to explore the gendered response to trauma. So it's the sandwich style dissertation. It's three separate standalone articles. The first one is the gendered response. So how women respond to trauma, Syrian refugee women specifically. The
Okay.
second one is how Syrian men respond to trauma, because it is very gendered, and the way that it shows up in the way that women respond to it versus the way men respond to it, we have seen based on interviews is very different. And then finally, the third article is this approach to healing trauma collectively, so healing in unity. But I bring in that dimension of why it's so important to understand, right? Like this participatory action research method where let's learn from people that are coming from there what they need, right, for healing their trauma. So it's also this inquiry into different research methods, indigenous research methods, as it pertains to healing trauma.
It's interesting that you say there's a different gendered approach.
Mm-hmm.
What I've been looking into is how, as men and women, we hold masculine and feminine traits. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're looking specifically at Syrian men and women, do you think there's ever a possibility or potential where men would come into the Blue Meets Blue space?
So the in 2015, my pattern maker was a male refugee, and he was amazing. And generally, I say that I work with female refugees because I want to create that empowering space for them. I want them to feel like, statistically, we know when the mom in the family is doing well as a refugee, the whole family will generally do better. And so it's kind of this empowerment for them. Also, statistically, we know that unfortunately, a lot of refugee women, they end up getting pushed into more volunteer work, and they're seen as these nurturing, mothering women, and they want to prove themselves, and they want to be able to be employed and have jobs and whatnot. So they're pushed into these more volunteer roles, whereas the men are usually the ones that are given opportunities and jobs and employment. And usually even for the men, they're given the more hard labor kind of
Yeah.
work. And so I really wanted it to be a space where women felt like they were seen and that they were their skill set was being recognized. But we, like I said, we did have our pattern maker was a male, and we have absolutely no problems, working with all refugees. But the point was that we wanted women to feel like they had a space.
That makes sense. Do
Mhm.
you feel like the narrative is shifting? Like when you go back to Syria, is there still very much, men have their place, women have their place? Is that still, how it plays out, or has there been a shift? For example, the husbands of these women that you are working with. Uh,
Mhm.
I don't know if you met any of them or, were able to engage with any of them, but what was their approach to it and their view of the whole concept?
Yeah, I think it depends on where they came from, right? So, like within Syria, the generally people that were from the capital, from Damascus, from like the larger cities, they're got have a higher educational background, and so they're a lot more accepting of women, their wives working or their wives. I think, and this is why I focus on this gendered aspect of the response to trauma, because for a lot of men, their whole identity comes from this feeling like they're the main,
I know.
breadwinners. They're the ones that are taking care of the family. They're the ones that, so for when the women end up taking that role, and sometimes the men don't find a job, it's almost like an identity crisis. Like, who am I if I'm not the breadwinner? Who am I if I'm not the one that,
Masculating.
yeah, and it feel and of course, we also know that different cultures think very differently of men role and gendered roles. And so for a lot of people, it is emasculating, right? Like, I should be the head of the household. I should be the one that is providing and earning and taking care of my wife, and being I don't want her to work, right? So we've had those situations where, because I help the resettlement center in Tampa. I used to do the cultural orientation um, before the current administration shut down the country to refugees coming in. I used to do the cultural orientation for the refugees coming to the United States, or to Tampa specifically, within our resettlement center. And so I have worked with a lot of men and have done a lot of interviews. And there is that aspect of, I remember one time the director of the center was talking to a man. She was one of the men, and she was telling them how she was able to find a job for his wife. And he was like so offended. Like, I'm the one that takes care of my wife. I'm the one that, I don't want her to work. I don't want her to have to get tired. I don't want her. She already has so much on her plate, which is like both, sweet, but also um, it takes some time for that cultural understanding to slowly shift. And there has been a lot of that shift, right? We've seen it happen where they'll come in like that, and then slowly they'll be like, okay, this makes sense. We need the income. We need, for the kids to go to school. We need to be able to so it just takes some time, but it is that initial it is that initial trauma response, right? And this is what I talk a lot about in that article about men's response to trauma, is that for a lot of times from the outside looking in, it looks like toxic masculinity, right? It looks like these men that are trying to be controlling or to be, and it's perceived as toxic from a Western perspective, but if you have the understanding of why this is the case, right? Why this is an identity crisis, why this throws everything that they know up in the air, why this is in addition to just having left war, potentially, trying to keep your family surviving, trying to keep your culture and your roots, right, in a place where you're being asked to assimilate or integrate. So it just feels like they're being asked to shed a lot of their identity all at once. And so it's a shock, right? It becomes very difficult. And um, so there is that. But I will definitely say that slowly that cultural understanding of their wives working or bringing in an extra income or even being the only breadwinner, it has changed and it is shifting. Yeah.
I never thought of it like that, and you've opened my eyes. I think I've been, more leaning towards the Western perception of masculinity, what is toxic, what is not toxic, but those layers of, culture, heritage, those beliefs that are ingrained in us, that definitely would inform how we respond to trauma. That makes a lot of sense. Um,
Mm.
are you in a space to share some of your main findings, or is that still?
Yeah, no, I mean, hopefully, like I said, I'm going to be defending soon, so I'm really excited about that. Specifically, my main request and push and call to action is that we come back to this understanding of healing trauma collectively, and what that looks like in building equitable societies, because I don't believe that we can have societies that are fair or equitable without this missing link, which is trauma. If you're not understanding the trauma that somebody has been through, if you're not understanding, and this is not just an individual trauma, right? Now we're talking about social trauma, cultural trauma, historical trauma, right? We know that trauma also passes intergenerationally. So when you look at intergenerational trauma, there are so many, I think, missing links that we don't necessarily look at when we are trying to decide something for a group of people, right? This is what people are, I think, very good at. Let's decide what we're going to do with this group of people with our understanding, with our research, with our. But you're missing this historical aspect of what these people have been through. You're missing all of this history and background. And so the reason I try to break it down into this is the way men respond and this is the way women respond is because in the West, we have this understanding of this is how men should act and this is how women should act. And, but we imposed a very Western perspective, right? Women should work. Women should XYZ. Men should be okay with their women doing XYZ. And if they're not, they're toxic. And it's just like this very quick, judgmental,
Diagnosis. Yeah.
yeah, space that we find ourselves in. And I have to say, when I first started with the resettlement center, I was also a little bit like, you should want your wife to work. Like, why wouldn't you? Like, this is a great opportunity, whatever. I didn't realize, and this only came after all of the interviews that I had conducted, is that these people, truly feel like they are being asked to completely get rid of everything that they've ever known, right? They have gone and they had just escaped war and they were trying really hard to keep their children alive and they were trying really hard to keep their wife alive and they took a really difficult journey and finally they make it, and this is the part where they get to like exhale and breathe and start. And now we're asking them to speak English because you're in America, and find a job, and also let your wife do all the things that you potentially did not want her to do before, and also your children, let them go to whatever school and speak only English and try to speak with them English at home. And you're asking for so much, and these men and even women at some level are like, but I want my children to have connections with their country and I want them to speak Arabic and I want them to have that tradition and that culture still alive. And for a lot of these people, they just end up going through this identity crisis. So with the men, they end up responding a lot of times by just kind of detaching emotionally, and then it ends up looking like they're being lazy, or it ends up looking like they are not being helpful to their wives. They're just in shock at this point. And this is also where a lot of the trauma finally settles in, right? This is the part where they have sat and they've settled and they are starting over, and they finally are able to breathe and exhale. And now all of a sudden they're being told, well, you're not really needed anymore because your kids can go to school and your wife can work, and and so for them they're like, well, what's my job, right? What am I helping with here, especially during that initial phase of resettlement. And then for the women, they take on a lot of burden emotionally, right? We know this with refugee women. They have to make sure that their kids are okay. They're still stepping in to make sure that their kids, they're helping their kids grieve, and they're helping their kids with their adjustment. And then oftentimes they have to help their men feel better because their men are not doing so well. And then they also, for them, the way that they end up feeling better, they end up either volunteering or socially participating in in social situations, because they feel like that's where they can, potentially get a lot of that fix. Um, but it's a very difficult. So when the healing happens, what I've realized is a lot of refugees, when you tell them, all right, now, let's do therapy, there's a mental health specialist that wants to talk to you, they'll go once because they have to. There's certain things that they have to do. And they're like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to talk with a stranger who this is their job, right? This is, at the end of the day, they don't care about me. They don't care about if I'm succeeding or not. They're telling me to do something that goes against everything that I believe in. In addition to the fact that they don't understand what I've been through, they don't understand my background, they don't understand my culture. I can't even explain myself in a way that makes sense because of the language barrier, right? And then on top of that, I want, like, a lot of the refugees that are working with were from a Muslim background. And so for them, they leaned heavily on their faith, right? And the therapist would tell them to do something that, potentially had nothing to do with that um, understanding. And it just kind of felt like it was so disconnected. And they're like, I don't understand the point of therapy. This is not helping me, right? I know that whatever I went through was a test. I know, like, this is the way that they framed it. I know that whatever I went through was a test. I know that whatever I had been through, I know that God will, reward me eventually or something. But it's just not necessarily translating when you look at it from a Western therapy perspective. And so my call to action is that when you are dealing with people coming from wherever part of the world, that you have to work with them based on their systems, right? Based on their approach to healing, based on their approach to understanding the world in a big perspective.
I love that because you know that old saying, teach people the way, or treat people the way you want to be treated. The reframe of that is treat people the way they would like to be treated, so you're not looking at it from your lens and your perspective.
Mhm.
There was a question I had and now it's just escaped me. Okay, I hope it comes back.
Mm.
What's next for Shahd and Blue Meets Blue and all the
I
work you're doing, actually? Not
finished my dissertation, so that is hopefully, like I said, within the next few months. So I'm really excited about that. It's been a long journey. And Blue Meets Blue, I'm excited. We're relaunching in January, and we are going to be using Syrian brocade, which I'm really excited about. And then I have another book coming out called From There to Here, and this is a another children's book. It's early readers chapter book, and it follows these children that are coming from different countries where a lot of refugees come from. So they start off at the resettlement center, and then each child goes through basically their last experience, or that last day before they left their country. So we have a child from Lebanon, a child from Iraq, from Palestine, from Syria, from Sudan. And they're basically telling their story. And then that last chapter is them coming back together and starting over with this renewed hope of friendship in a new country, with new hopes. So that's hopefully coming out within this year.
That is so beautiful. I'm going to include all of the links to Shahid's work in the description of this podcast. But I wanted to ask you, you it feels like you just flow and ideas just come, and you have this creative energy and the space and the manifestation that you just bring forth. What holds space for you to be able to do this? How do you keep sane, and how do you deal with your own trauma throughout this process?
That's a really great question. I think everybody works very differently and they deal with their, the whatever they're dealing with in different ways. So I know some people they need to take a break and they need to pull back. For me, I feel like I do the best work when I am under a million deadlines. Like that's when I'm able to be the most productive, but if I have like one deadline, I will just procrastinate forever. And I don't know why I'm wired this way, but this is the way that I get most of my work done. So I feel like the more projects I have, the more, and it's so funny because I was talking to a friend, and this friend, I love her because she's not in the same space, but we're both very alike in the way that we work. And I was telling her, I'm like, it's so crazy to me because when I look back at the course of my life over the past decade of like everything that I have done, it just all truly is aligned. Like, and it wasn't planned like that. It's just, I guess this really is what I'm passionate about. And so whether it's like the masters or Blue Meets Blue or the sociology work or the resettlement center or the books that I wrote, it's all like the same thread of like humanitarianism and trauma and all of this building better societies. And I'm really happy because it's very validating to my own self when I'm looking back, like this really is something that this is something that I care about. And it's nice that it does come full circle eventually. It's nice that it does end up making sense. But yeah, I think the way that I will hold space for myself is that I know the things that I need to de-stress. And I've built a very good stress toolkit over the course of understanding this healing work and psychology and all of that. So I know when I do need to step back a little bit, I know the things that will make me happy. I know the things that I need to be able to just recharge and get back into it.
You know what I love about what you've said, because it does feel like you're churning out this huge amount of work, and you said it, is that you've been in alignment all of this time, with your higher purpose, with your higher self, and it doesn't then feel like work anymore when it is in alignment with a
Yeah.
calling, or um, a feeling that you're giving back.
You're absolutely right. And it's so funny because I know that I have tried to like start up another thing on the side here or there, and it's never worked because it just was not in alignment with what I was doing. And I would always be like, I wonder why, because normally I'm very much like if I say I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna do it.
Yeah,
And I'm like, I'm just like really confused as to why that didn't manifest or it didn't work out. And it was so far off what I currently do that I just wasn't passionate about it. And I just like it never ignited.
I love that. I've just started my own business, and I'm starting to realize that only now. So I'm really inspired and humbled by your journey, because I'm only now starting, and there have been threads, but
Mm,
now because of the flow that I'm experiencing, like meeting you as an example, coming onto the podcast is, since I stepped onto this path and I'm choosing alignment with my purpose, everything, the people that need to be in the space, the experiences, it just comes in.
flows.
It just flows.
Yeah.
Um,
That's when you know you're doing the right thing, when it's just all, when it works out, when it works
exactly.
seamlessly.
When there's
Yeah.
ease, again, it's like that fast fashion, slow fashion, the different way of being. I just remembered now, and before we close off, I wanted to appreciate you for deep diving into trauma, because a lot of the time, and I don't want to say it's generalization if I say it's a Western approach, but a lot of the time it feels like we're being forced to bypass that healing, to
Yeah.
numb it out or just, and that's actually what then happens, is you end up distracting, numbing out until that trauma
Mhm.
starts
Show.
chasing. It
Yeah.
shows up in a bigger way in
Yeah.
order to be healed and faced. And It's not a weakness to sit
No.
in trauma. It's not a weakness to sit in those emotions of fear, anxiety, insecurity, unworthiness, because they want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be acknowledged and integrated, right? I don't ever think, and it's my opinion that we're never fully healed. We just learn how to integrate those parts
Mhm.
of ourselves into how we show up. And then that affects how we choose. What's your take on that?
I think, first of all, I love that you said that. There's three things that I want to say about that. First of all, I lean heavily on Dr. Gabor Mate. He's the leading expert
Yeah.
on trauma. Love him. His work's been so phenomenal and so enlightening. And he says that we live in traumatized societies. And I think that's so true, right? Look at everything that's happening in the world around us. It's very hard, for people. I mean, we turn on the news and we live on the other side of the world and we are affected and you get secondhand trauma and whatever. Think about the people that are actually obviously living under those conditions or going through this trauma. And in addition to the fact that I think, my work, I really take this collectivist approach to trauma and trauma within society because I think a lot of the trauma that we look at is this individual trauma, but well, what about the collective trauma? What about the historical trauma? What about how trauma affects communities? We know that historically, when trauma affects communities the way that it does, people show up differently. They trust differently, right? Like look at medical experiments that have happened historically. Certain communities don't trust medical experts, right? Like there's so much. And then when you just look at it, like, okay, well, why don't you want to go see the doctor? Or why don't you want to get this shot? And you're not looking at the history behind it. You're not looking at this intergenerational trauma that's been passed down. You don't get the full picture. You just don't understand it. And this is just a small example. Think about, everything else. Trauma affects the way we build societies. Trauma affects the way that we build communities, how we approach each other, how
We
we
raise our kids.
how
That's
we raise
great.
our kids, how they show up in the world, and it's very intergenerational. What I really do, talk about though is that I don't like having trauma be used as a reason for victimization because that is not what this is. That is like I think a lot of people sometimes will be wary of using this, okay, trauma, 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 trauma. And obviously it's overused and outside the industry, it's just like very, very troubling because now everybody wants to use it it's like a buzzword. But I think there's a fine line between saying, let's understand how trauma affected community versus okay, we're now going to take this victim mindset approach and
Right.
woe is me. These are two very separate things.
That's different.
I what I try to say is that we do need to understand trauma so that we're able to understand community, so that we're able to understand why certain people do what they do and why they show up the way that they show up, why we show up the way that we show up, right? Like we're all human. And so for me, that's one of the main things that I talk about, and looking at trauma from a sociological, societal, communal perspective, and healing trauma in the same way, and understanding that trauma gets healed in very different ways. Um, so I just don't think that we have a lot of resources about collectivist communities, maybe because that is how our education system works here. We're a lot more focused on Western, thinkers and Western, um, uh, uh, sociologists and psychologists and everything. And so that for me is a personal, my personal mission is to look at it from that perspective and understand how healing happens in community.
I think that's my main takeout from today is, and I love Gabo Mate. I was reading his book on addiction. Uh,
Mm,
and he says, the opposite end of addiction is connection.
mm,
And
yeah.
he's spoken to heroin addicts where, that shot of heroin just feels, to them, it feels like a warm hug.
Yeah. But
And
it's to say an abnormal response to an abnormal situation is a normal response, right? And people turn to this stuff because something's missing, right? And this is the missing link. Like what's missing? Let's talk about that.
exactly. And how it's so important to connect. And that is, that's exactly what your work is about, is bringing women together. It's connecting, it's collective recovery. And you've taught me a lot. And I'm
Mm,
going to take this away with me as well in my entrepreneurship is how do I give back? How do I make blessing bags? Just that simple example is absolutely beautiful. Teaching my kids that and what can I do in my community, in my small circle to give back? And you've just shown us that it doesn't take millions of, dollars in your case
mm,
to do. It's just a small action, small choices, and alignment,
mm.
which is so beautiful. And I just want to honor you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm getting emotional for the work that you do, and it really inspired me. And I'm sure that it will inspire many more that listen
Thank
to
you.
this podcast. And sending you so many blessings with this new phase of Blue Meets Blue. I can't wait. Will we be able to order it here in South Africa or anywhere in the world? Will it be
Absolutely.
online?
It will be online. It's only online, so you will be able to order it.
That will be amazing. I'm looking out for that. And thank you again for joining me. And I'm so glad that we connected.
For having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm very grateful to have a friend all the way over there now.
Oh, that's amazing. Me too.
Thank you.
Sending lots of blessings, Shade.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And to the listeners, if this resonated with you, please share your comments. We'd love to hear from you. And I'll leave Shahid's details in the description box if you'd like to reach out, and also the details of Blue Meets Blue. And yeah, thank you for being here.
And good luck on your entrepreneurship journey. I
Thank
can't
you
wait
so much.
to connect with you about that as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Take care. Cheers.
Bye.